Sound design.
Can you learn it all on the job? You can. I certainly wouldn't recommend it.
Sound design. Sound Design Live is produced independently by me, Nathan Lively, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Welcome to Sound Design Live, the home of the world's best online training and sound system tuning that you can do at your own pace from anywhere in the world. I'm Nathan Lively, and today I'm joined by touring front-of-house sound engineer Robert Scovill and his two dogs. Robert, welcome to Sound Design Live.
Me and the dogs are great. Glad to be here.
Now, Robert, I actually couldn't find anything out about you in preparation for this interview, so I'm assuming that you're just starting out in the industry. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. Just did my first live gig the other day, so yes. It was pretty exciting.
All right, Robert. So everyone knows that you worked with Tom Petty for a long time, so why don't you share with us your favorite Tom Petty song?
I don't know if I have a favorite Tom Petty song. I certainly have some that are very near and dear to my heart, so I'll share one of those. And I think I might have shared this publicly before. But, me and my wife kind of have a song. It seems like every time I do a tour, there will be one song on the tour that kind of becomes ours, and we have some nice memories around it. And that one is certainly King's Highway. There's certain songs that just kind of get to me when he plays them live, and when I'm mixing that one, it's hard to stay focused.
Wow,
So it's like that, in touring. When you work with acts long enough, they all become your favorite songs after a while.
Sure. Everyone has that experience of starting on a project and thinking like, I'm not sure if I'm totally into this music, and then you get a few weeks into it and you're like, I love every song, and you can't get it out of your head.
Doesn't matter what it is, it'll stick with you for a while, no doubt about it.
So, Robert, how did you get your very first job in audio, like your first paying gig?
I was in college at the time, studying towards a double E. I'd come out of high school at 17 and had enrolled right into this technical college, studying toward a double E in electronic engineering. And had always really, I was trying to find my way into, to music production. That's what I wanted to get into. And at the school, a local regional sound company, kind of a regional heavyweight sound company, came and put up an ad requesting volunteers, to come down and work on this big series of shows that they held every weekend during the summer called the Summer Park Series or the Brush Creek Park Series. I can't remember what it was called now, but
okay.
They had it was a big event. They would have put on these free concerts down there, and 15,000, 16,000 people would show up on the weekends to see these things. They were big events. They weren't little events.
So they needed a lot of labor.
Yeah. So I was all over it. I was like, yeah, I'm going. I want to be a part of this. So, went down and volunteered for the first week, and they shoved me right in, had me doing a lot of stuff, and just to be true to my word here and truthful about it, I was awful. I
don't know what we would expect on your very first gig.
Yeah, no. This is kind of similar to kind of what happens in the world today. I think these guys at this company kind of said, well, let's go to the electronic engineering school and pull those guys. They'll be pretty sharp. We'll be able to pull those in. It's no different than kind of getting interns out of recording schools and stuff like that to go out on the road, where there's this expectation that they're going to know these things,
Oh, right.
And, I got there, I think one of the first blunders that I did was, I hooked up about 10 wedges to one half of an amplifier and blew up the amplifier, where the irony is, you're in technical school, you're in engineering and design school, you understand all the concepts of circuit loading and impedance and all those things. You're studying them every day in school. You just have no practical application of it. So, you show up and, here, plug these wedges in. Okay.
Sure.
Boom, smoke, so.
Wow.
So the funny part was, they didn't, I didn't get called back the next weekend. I sat by the phone kind of waiting to get called back because I wanted to go down again and work so bad. And they didn't call, and I was watching the clock, and I was thinking, okay, they got to be started by now. I'm just going to head down there. So, so I just showed up. And it's not like it was a big union call or any of that kind of stuff where you weren't going to have a lot of union rules in place. So I just showed up, and they never called me back again, and I just kept showing up every weekend.
Wow. Cool.
So after a while, they went through a rotation of guys, and I became kind of the veteran on the crew, where I was kind of I won't say running things, but, I was in charge of a lot more than when I first got there. That's for sure. And, I had worked an entire summer, the entire season without getting a single paycheck. The company had this kind of end-of-year Christmas party that they invited me to. They were just like, hey, invite the guys down that worked for the summer, blah, blah, blah. And, after that summer series, I kept going to the shop there and kind of hanging out, and they would let me help prep rigs and all kind of stuff that were going out. And finally, they ended up offering me a job kind of at that Christmas party, So it was, like I say, it was a story of perseverance, really, as much as anything.
Sure, you just
to get
kept
that
showing
first
up.
gig. That first paycheck tasted awful good, though. I don't mind telling you.
So just a lot of volunteering basically turned into your first paying gig.
Without a doubt. Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I interned there without even knowing what an intern was, so.
I'm sure a lot of people talk to you who would also like to do the job that you're doing. Do you ever recommend to them to do work for free or try volunteering? Is that still something that you think would be helpful to people who are starting out?
I think it is a good attitude to have kind of in your pocket, for sure, that you are willing to work for free to get your foot in the door and, blah, 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 kind of get the whole thing going. That's not a bad thing to have. That shows dedication and kind of commitment to what you're doing. It shows that you're not there just for the paycheck. So, those are good virtues to kind of be showing somebody. But, you've got to be smart enough to turn that around at some point and actually parlay it into a career if that's what you want to do. And, honestly, that part of it, honestly, all of it is much, much more difficult today. I mean, it's just the industry is so much denser and so much more specialized than it was then. I mean, keep in mind, that year that I did that was 1979.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was pre-digital anything, and even sound reinforcement was still on whole very fundamental at that point, very basic, very fundamental. I mean, you were lucky to see a 24-channel console at that point.
Oh, wow.
Like I say, it was a different time, and, it required a different set of skill sets even just to kind of get in the door. Today, you'd have so many more requirements in terms of skill and background to even get your foot in the door now, so.
I don't think Robert's saying here, it's much harder now and you shouldn't try. It's just that maybe things are a little bit different than just going down and showing up. You might need to do a little bit of technical training beforehand, or know someone who's going to invite you in and train you for a little bit. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that would be the epiphany that anybody that walked through the door today would say. It even happened a little bit in 1979, but certainly today, where you would walk through the door and very quickly realize you're in over your head.
Yeah.
And say, okay, I've got to go get some real knowledge of this. Otherwise you're going to just end up being, the cable monkey who, pulls cables all day for a living. You're going to end up kind of defaulting back to, working on, a paid for crew somewhere and doing the menial task. You're not going to be part of the technical solution here. And that's the epiphany that comes into people's heads when they get into this business today, is I think they come into it thinking it's kind of simple. And it is anything but that today. It's very complex today, technically. So there's a lot to learn, It's a big journey.
Just to take one step farther with this, I had someone ask me yesterday, do I need to get trained? Can I learn everything on the job? And my answer for them was that it kind of depends on what kind of person you are. Just because I used to say to everyone in the past, yes, you have to get trained. But then I've met people since then who were trained in something different, like music, and were started out just playing in bands and being a musician at a professional level, and then switched over to being an engineer and kind of trained themselves and got some help from other people and ended up becoming great mixers and having great technical minds. But not everyone can do that. And so that's what I was thinking about when you were saying you might just end up being the cable monkey, because if you don't get training and you just get started assuming you'll learn everything in the job, but you don't push that agenda, basically, you don't make sure that you are getting that training, nobody's really going to do it for you, so I think that's how you might end up being the cable monkey. Yeah.
It's a fine line, really, and and it's nuance, really, in how you discuss it, because it plays into personality for sure as well. Like if you get through the door and realize you're in over your head, there's two kinds of personalities, one that will fall back and one that will go forward, So can you learn it all on the job? You can. I certainly wouldn't recommend it, you know, because there's, it's not like there's one way to learn it, and you're totally at the bay of where you learn it. It would be like, I want to be an Indy 500 racer. Well, I would not be the guy to throw you out on the Indy 500 track and say, go ahead, let's learn how to do it.
Sure.
I mean, you're going to start at the very bottom there with that kind of mentality. I mean, you're going to, that's the slowest path, and probably the hardest path to take, whereas if you can, find the quality people to get some insight, find some quality work to do and get good training on it, that's uber important. I actually think it's kind of and you're a good example of somebody who's trying to offset this. It's a real challenge for our industry right now, because I think it's very fair to say that the technology and its capabilities have outpaced the user group that is using it. There's little doubt about that, especially in this IP-based world, et cetera. Now, that said, there is an entire younger generation coming up right behind us that do not think of it as exotic or anything at all. They're all in, and they get it. They're not scared of it or intimidated by it. Whereas the older crowd, the guys that have been around for a long time, can get intimidated by the newer technologies, So it's a balance. It's really a balance. And our industry is really kind of challenged with it right now of how do we train people to do this? Because there is no, for the most part, I mean, there hasn't been any really long-standing established kind of best practices.
Sure.
I mean, you go to this sound company, they're going to teach you their way. You go to this sound company, they're going to teach you their way. And, somewhere, if you tunnel down far enough in that, are some common audio fundamentals. But in terms of what is right and what is wrong in terms of approach, my goodness, that's as broad as it comes.
Yeah, it's largely unregulated industry. I was just talking with some friends this morning they were all talking about how they have to get their continuing education credits to continue with their licensing. And this was like, a therapist, an acupuncturist, a personal trainer. And they're like, what about you? What do you have to do? And I was like, nothing. I mean, I do a lot, but I don't have to do anything.
Yeah, I'm not required to do anything.
Call yourself a sound engineer anytime you want.
Yeah.
Poof, you're a sound engineer.
Yeah, it's a weird one. We struggle with. I mean, I've helped write some curriculums in my life and been involved a lot in education and training. You've got to be able to, I think, at some point define and decide what is the science and what is the art. Now, there's going to be some little gray area there where they're going to cross over a little bit. But the thing I fight so many times with younger guys or guys that are fresh to the business is confusing subjectivity with things that are absolute truths,
Okay.
Like, I like the PA when there's interaction in the PA like this, it smooths it out. It sounds better, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, wait a minute, what are we trying to achieve here?
Yeah. What do those words mean?
Yeah. What is, so we want time smear in the PA. You like how that sounds? That's an artistic decision for you. Is that what you're telling me? I mean, I've had that kind of conversation infinitum on all sorts of things, where many of us would look at it and just go, well, that's, I mean, I hate to put it this way, but that's wrong. That's the wrong way to do it. Well, that's kind of my way of doing it. Well, okay.
Well, if you're going to divide, subjectivity and objectivity and have science and art, then yeah, on the science side, there has to be wrong and right. Right.
Things are pretty cold and cut and dried there, many times, But I remember having this discussion with somebody talking about, a horizontally arrayed PA and the interaction that happens in the mid and the far field with that kind of design, unless it's designed very specifically. And they were, they kept bringing up the word chaotic. Well, it just gets chaotic the more you get into the far field. And I'm like, it's not chaotic at all. It is completely predictable, mathematically predictable. There's nothing chaotic about it by definition at all, So, it's kind of a misuse of the terms, I mean, in their mind, it becomes chaotic, but it's like, no, that's not chaos.
Yeah, my experience is that the more complex things get, and audio interactions are often complex, the more complex things get, the more people kind of want to back away from trying to understand them and say things like, yeah, I just use my ears, or where we're taking the science and trying to make it art, taking the science and trying to make it subjective and saying, this is just the way I like it. And, well, hold on. We can actually talk about this in terms that can be measured, and we can use science. We don't have to be scared.
Yeah, this whole concept, I mean, I'm so worn out of just use your ears. Well, okay, I do use my ears. I just use the science to back up what I believe, Like using your ears is some sort of invalidation of any kind of scientific or methodical approach,
Yeah, it's funny that there's a divide, the whole idea that there's two camps of people who use their ears and people who don't is ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. Like I said, I'm weary of that whole. Well, I'm as weary of that one as analog versus digital. So
sure, and I know you've talked about in the past. People like to get into camps with their consoles and say, "I'm a Digico guy" or "I'm an Avid guy," and that's also not going to be helpful to you in the long run. If you're limited and you can say, "Oh, I can't work on that show. I'm a Digico guy."
That's a real problem in our industry right now. I mean, I've talked about this extensively, and I'm trying to put together some ways, in terms of our community of manufacturers and users to try to quell this a little bit, because it doesn't serve anybody for all of the users to become tribal. Certainly doesn't serve the manufacturers. That is for certain, because their customer bases shrink when that happens, and that does not serve our industry. We don't need less money going into the manufacturers right now. If anything, we need more to continue the development of these products. I mean, dare I say it, I don't think we want to get it down to where just because of revenue, we only have maybe one or two console manufacturers out there,
Right. Yeah.
So, that doesn't serve anybody. And, it certainly doesn't serve the end users to be tribal, where it's like, I only want to use this console, or worse than that, actually, I can only use this console. I only know how to use this one console, or these two consoles. But knowing them all and staying really fluent on all of them right now, man, that is a daunting task.
Do you have any views of the future? What do you think we're going to see in the next 10 to 20 years? Do you think consoles will continue down this path of becoming more and more specialized in their own ways, of saying, we know what's right, we know the workflow that's correct and the features that are correct, and we're going to keep investing in that? Or do you think there'll be some kind of compromise where there will be at least some common features, common workflows, some commonality among the consoles that will make the skills more interchangeable?
Yeah, I think you hit on it there. And this sounds fluffy to say it, because I don't know how we do it at this point. I really don't. But what needs to happen is some commonality in the workflow. The biggest challenge right now is that just all the OSs, all the operating systems for these consoles are different. They all work on different software. And just maintaining. If you're a guy who's going console to console to console night after night after night, which is honestly getting rarer these days just because it's such a challenge, the thing that suffers the most is the show itself, because then you end up having to boil your show file or your approach to getting audio through these consoles and building a show file down to its least common denominator in order to survive day to day to day, So, and that's the complete opposite of what we wanted to happen with digital consoles. With digital, we wanted to be able to present audio with great detail in it and great consistency night to night to night. And that if you're in the different console every night crowd, that is very difficult to do right now. Very difficult to do. Was better. That part of it was better when we were in analog. I believe it or not. I can't believe I'm going to say that, but I think it is.
Well, the result, which is something that you've talked about also before, is that you end up being more of a console operator and less of a mixer. And that is, you've got your head down just trying to make sure all the knobs are in the right place instead of having your head up and being more connected with what the art is that you are participating with.
Yeah, it's even worse than that, really, because I think, it's another term I've kind of coined over the years. You get the digital handcuffs, where it's like you want to do something and you just get stopped right in your track going, how do I do that on this console?
All right, Robert, I want to talk some more about consoles, but I also, before we do that, I want to loop back to talking about personality and perseverance, because perseverance is definitely, I think, a theme of your life and your career. Back in September, you and I and 10 other authors published a book called Get on Tour. So what I'd like to do is just take a deeper dive into a couple of things that you wrote there. So in 1985, you were 24 years old, and you learned that there was an opening in the monitor engineer position on the John Cougar Mellencamp tour. So you write, I was certain that this was my shot. I lobbied very hard for that position. So I'm just curious, I don't know if it really matters, but what were you doing? What does lobby very hard mean? What were you doing to try and get that job?
Well, and it's important to keep the context there, right? Because I had done the previous tour working for Kenny Aronoff. So I had already done the Pink Houses tour. So I was in tune and in contact with the band's manager, the band, John himself. It was going to be the same sound company. All of those things were common coming back for that next tour, except for the monitor engineer being gone. They had made the claim they were going to replace the monitor guy who had been with them for a long time. It was actually shocking to me that they were going to do it. And I had already been out on tours, mixing monitors and engineering at that point, et cetera. So, again, I just kind of felt like that was my shot. So I really started with the sound company and said, well, if they ask you for a reference, will you give me a reference for that position? And they said they would. Nice. The band's tour manager, I was in touch with him saying, hey, I want to be considered for this job, so that's who I was lobbying to really as much as anybody, and obviously I had the ear of the band members a little bit who were very supportive of the idea. So, I felt like I had a good shot at getting it. And as it turned out, I did, so.
There's some notoriety around the challenge of working for John Cougar Mellencamp.
Yeah, well, that would come into play here greatly. I don't think I'm talking out of school or, talking out of turn here to say, John has a reputation of being a very hard guy to work for. And honestly, I saw it firsthand on the Pink Houses tour. I knew, the animal that I was taking on here. I clearly understood that I was going to be sticking my head in the lion's mouth here to deal with this guy, Yeah. So, and it sounds kind of fluffy. And
was he just kind of like driving because he really wanted a really perfect show, or was he, what's his personality like that made it so hard?
He's a very demanding guy. Okay. I saw him really run his band through the paces. He was really, really hard on those guys. But I say this with all sincerity, I am sure in John's heart, he felt like, I'm Vince Lombardi and I'm going to make these guys the Green Bay Packers. He was pushing them hard. It's the oldest coaching saying in the world, push them hard now, drive them hard now, hug them later, So, you don't have to be nice to them during that part when you're trying to drive people to be really hard and really demanding. And that attracted me. I'm not going to lie. That attracted me. I like that sort of thing. I like to be pushed and driven in that kind of setting. I just do. It's just part of my personality. I like running at challenges, so.
Okay, good.
I kind of saw that. So I just felt like, okay, I can do this. I was probably overly confident I could do it, but felt like I could certainly do it from the technical end, So
great. Well, let's talk about running at the challenge. So you did end up getting that job and then not immediately, but then lost it. So what happened? Yeah,
and obviously I've processed this a lot in my life because it actually turned out to be, it was I don't want to call it a dark time, but it was, a time where you really had to look straight into the mirror and be honest with yourself. Mm-hmm. But, it was a combination of two things, I think. It wasn't lost on John that I hadn't worked in that role on the previous tour. So there was a big proving ground that was going to have to be taking place there, And this was the Scarecrow tour. It was clearly going to be John's biggest tour that he had ever done to date. And I just know in his mind, he was thinking, man, I've got to walk out on stage knowing that I've got the guy sitting over there. Mm-hmm. And, I'm a rookie. I'm a rookie pitcher pitching in the World Series right now, Wow. So, I think that undermined it a little bit. Now, that said, I don't really think I did anything to help my cause there. As a matter of fact, I did things that didn't help my cause there because I didn't know how to interact with that personality yet. I didn't have that skill yet. He didn't have respect for me yet. That respect was going to have to be earned, and it just did not exist yet. And it was that kind of thing of, he doesn't have time for me to earn his respect. He's on the biggest tour of his life. So, it kind of undermined the whole thing. And yeah. Well, I mean, it was added pressure that he probably didn't feel like he needed. So all that said, he's also kind of one of these guys where if you get under his thumb, I mean, he just will not let you up. He's just relentless. I mean, it's just a part of his personality.
What were you thinking to yourself in that moment? Like, don't show any weakness. Don't screw up.
Yes and no. I mean, I also kind of believe if you're thinking that way, you're already done. Right. I mean, you just can't think like that in that situation. You've got to believe in what you're doing, present it, and let the chips fall where they may. Now that said, I mean, part of that monitor engineer's job is to keep that guy calm. I don't care whether it's John Mellencamp or anybody else, is to build confidence into that performer that when they walk on stage, it's going to be not good, it's going to be great, and you're going to have a great show. Yeah. I mean, that is part of it. And that is self-fulfilling. The more they feel like that, the better they perform. And the better they perform, the more they feel like that. I mean, it's just, it's just a rapid circle there. So, and you've got to feed that in that position there, So I think you got to feed it as a front of house engineer, let alone a monitor engineer. So, there's a lot of responsibilities in that position that go above and beyond what you can do technically, And honestly, I just wasn't ready for it yet. I wasn't mature enough for it yet.
Robert, you just talking about how you felt like you weren't mature enough, you weren't ready for it. I think you also said that you weren't really great, you weren't really ready to like manage that kind of a relationship. And 30 years went by, I'm going to say, and now I have it on good word from a person whose opinion that I respect highly has told me that you are one of the best people in the industry at managing many people's expectations at once. And that is one of the reasons that you're so great at your job. That's just like part of doing the job that this person really respects that you're doing. So what happened in the last 30 years that took you from being, maybe really terrible at relationship management to what other people see as, the epitome of excellent relationship management?
Well, I mean, let's compare it right back to walking into a situation where you know nothing technically, right? If you have that moment where you kind of go, I'm in over my head, then you're going to take the initiative. You're either going to cower or you're going to take the initiative to learn, right? I applied that exactly to that skill. Relational things that I probably took for granted up to that point when because I honestly even at that age, I had been exposed to a lot of heavyweight guys. I'd watched a lot of really great producers in the studio work who were a little heavy-handed at times, et cetera, and having to manage that. And all of a sudden, I became keenly aware of that relational aspect to the job. And I was watching like a hawk and learning every time I watched somebody interact with an artist, just literally, learning on the job, so to speak. But by the same token, kind of looking myself in the mirror and realizing my shortcomings there and going, okay, well, we're doing fine technically. Let's just carry on there. But this other piece of this is completely lacking. Let's really figure out how you're going to be that person. I mean, you just have to figure it out. I mean, first you have to recognize it and then you have to chase it, I think I might have alluded to it in the book, that John Cougar experience, that John Mellencamp experience came back to help me greatly on another gig where I worked with a very, very similar personality.
I'll talk about it. I don't know if I remember.
Yeah, well, I mean, many years later, what was it, 20 some odd years later, I was asked to go work for Prince. It's almost like John Mellencamp on steroids working for Prince in terms of the personality I'm talking now.
Okay.
And, all of those lessons I learned from that early tour, I put into play on that tour because it was a very, very similar game. I mean, working for Prince is about gaining his respect. Mm-hmm. Until you do that, all bets are off. It doesn't matter how good a job you do. It doesn't matter how good the show sounds. None of that. Until you gain that guy's respect, you are not going to be in that seat. It just was not going to happen, And like I said, I learned a lot of really, really valuable lessons working with Mellencamp on that. I remember recalling it kind of, just subconsciously many times in my time working with Prince of, nope, don't do this. Don't do that.
Can you think of any specific examples? I'm wondering if it's just a matter of being competent and respectful over and over and over again, or if there's some specific things you felt like this do say, this don't say. Are there any do's and don'ts that you can remember?
I'll give you the best example of it. John had a way at times of testing you and playing you, where he would kind of say things to you to kind of get under your skin. And depending on how you reacted, the conversation would go on or it would stop. I didn't handle that well. I let a lot of things get under my skin that were probably innocent and meaningless, and it impacted the job. So I recognized that when it was going on with Prince very, very quickly, because he would, he had been through. It's legendary. He's been through so many mixers. If you're on the list of mixers who's been fired by Prince, you're on a pretty elite list. And so the reputation kind of preceded itself there. And I kind of quickly recognized he would say things that were kind of testing you. Oh, okay. Like he would throw out these wild ideas of, this is what we need to do with the PA today. For I don't know how, but somehow I recognize he's testing me right now. If we actually do this, he's actually going to lose respect for me because he's going to know that I'm just a yes man right now. Oh, wow. I'm just saying this to keep the job.
Sure.
Whereas if you push back against him in a meaningful way and say, look, really, we can't do this, and here's why, and then you back that up, you've instantly gained some points on your respect credit card,
Okay.
And I did that numerous times in that first couple of weeks that I worked with him, because I'm going to tell you, that first week, especially, that I worked with him was really turbulent. It was really turbulent.
Wow.
A lot of guys would have they would have crumbled under it, But I was able to kind of use that Mellencamp experience and kind of,
you wouldn't
survive that first week and then turn it completely around.
You kind of had to know. You just had to have that experience before to know kind of the cycle and know that I will make it through this.
Yeah. It's one of those things. Just keep taking your best shots. Be able to back up anything you say. Blah blah blah. It's an integrity play, really. At the end of the day.
Did he end up firing you?
No. Okay. I was in the no, so I'm not on the good list, right? I was working on a record project at the time, and I only had about 3 weeks where I could do it. We were on a break from the record, so I thought, and a friend of mine asked me to come out and help him out on it. So I only had 3 weeks to come out and kind of salvage it, and they only had a couple more shows after that on the tour anyway. But by the end of it, he and I got on really famously. We were, I don't want to say we were tight, but there was definitely mutual respect there, and I'm certain he would have asked me back, and I would have gone back. I would have gone back because we kind of set some boundaries, and both respected him. It was great. It was great.
Robert, let's just wrap up the story about John Cougar Mellencamp, because there's part of the story in the book that I found really impressive, and I just wanted to see if we could talk about it a little bit more. So you lost a job, and at that point, most people would have just gone home. Like, usually you lose a job, you go do a different job, or you go somewhere else, or you go home or whatever. But you felt like you had a decision to make. You thought, I could either go home or I could attempt to stay in this place where I've just been rejected. And so I'm just wondering, why did you think that was a decision you had to make? Take us to that moment in your life. Describe what was happening and kind of what was going on in your head.
I'll tell you something. The day I got, they told me they were going to replace me. They had clearly already been working on it for a couple of days because they had the guy ready to come in on a moment's notice, and that was kind of a dark day. I remember that being a pretty dark day for me. Mm-hmm. And I don't know whether, I guess it's a function of the way I was raised, the way I was, I don't know. I don't know what to put it down to or what to give credit to. But there was just this innate sense in me of, I've got to stick this out, and because there's some people that put their neck on the line for me, and if I just cower back home, not only will I look bad, but all of those people will look bad too. I've got to find a way to salvage not only my name but their name here, And then on top of it, there was that underlying thing of, and I honestly, I realized it pretty quickly of, there's a part of me that's inadequate right now. There's a part of my skill set that's inadequate right now. Mm-hmm. And if they're bringing in the guy, I want to see what separates me from him.
Okay.
I want to watch him work. And I ended up being his systems engineer. I kind of went from mixer to setting up his stuff and standing right by him for the rest of the run.
Wow.
And it was really important for me to see him work and see how he handled John, Not that anybody handles John, but how how he interacted with him. That was if I had to pick maybe one of the best decisions I ever made in my career, that would be top 5 for sure, because it both opened up my eyes to some things that I was not doing, and also opened up my eyes to, I can definitely do this job. I definitely have the stuff to do this job. I've just got to clean up some areas of my approach,
So, Robert, one of the most helpful pieces of advice that you give in the book is, if you want to be a front of house mixer, build relationships with artists. If you want to be a monitor mixer or systems technician, build relationships with sound companies. So with all the different paths people could potentially take to get into different areas of the industry, I thought that was kind of great advice. So tell me more about this. It sounds like maybe the artist wants to choose the front of house sound engineer. That's normally the way the hiring is done, but not the monitor engineer and the system tech. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I don't want to lead you to believe this is an absolute hard and fast rule here. I have just watched it shift over a period of 20 or 30 years here. There was a period of time, I would say certainly through the 80s and maybe at the beginning of the 90s, but it had kind of petered out by then, where the vast majority of artists took their recommendations on front of house and monitor engineers from the sound company that was going to be doing the tour. It was just kind of the way it went. It was the mode. And then that started to change a little bit in the 80s and the 90s because, mixing became, I dare I say it this way, I hope I don't insult anybody by saying it this way, but it became more specialized.
Okay.
You started seeing front of house positions, by 1986, 87, that would rival, the greatest control rooms in studios in the world. It just became a lot more specialized. And I think the artist wanted to have a lot more say in who they were actually going to have mix the event, and or mix their tour. Whereas monitor guys, they don't have necessarily, they're not hanging in those circles. Those have always traditionally kind of come from, a sound company kind of background. It would be very rare for you to see somebody come from being a studio engineer to being a monitor engineer. It's happened. I'm sure it's happened, but that's rarer, much rarer than seeing somebody come from a studio environment and become a front of house engineer. Mm-hmm. And that started to happen a lot more through the late 80s and early 90s. And I think it's because the skills kind of collided a little bit. It would not be uncommon for you to see a front of house engineer, actually go on after the tour and work with the artist in the studio, things like that. So, you could see it all kind of starting to change a little bit, where the front of house mixers became a lot more, there was a lot more independent contractors as front of house mixers than there were monitor engineers. And really that's kind of the dividing line, because once those artists found a front of house engineer that they really liked, they wanted to hold on to him.
Got it. Yeah.
Whereas if that guy came from the sound company, well, when the tour was over, they were going to put him on something else. And you kind of set yourself up for the collision, where at some point he's going to be required to be on 2 tours and can't be there. So the artists found themselves kind of wanting to being able to hold on to their guy,
It's kind of funny because I think the monitor engineer has a much personal, closer relationship with the artists on stage and making them feel confident, making them feel good. But I guess a lot of people, when you're starting out, if you're going to have one position, you have a front of house engineer if you're on a really small tour, and then later on your more positions get added, like your monitor engineer and your system tech.
Yeah, the monitor engineers, I won't call it the luxury, but it's the luxury moving forward, right?
I want to talk to you a little bit about how you like to have your mix console set up. You have an excellent training video online that I definitely recommend everyone watches called Console Management and Live Mixing. And in it, you describe the signal flow of a typical input. And I'm just going to run through it. You tell me if I got it right, and maybe you could sort of talk a little bit about why you like to do that. So you like to go from a channel input to then a preamp saturation emulation to a tape compression to EQ, and then all of your channels go to some kind of subgroup before they hit the master bus. Is that correct?
That's almost correct. The signal path is actually emulation, equalization, and then saturation, or then tape compression, I should say. Yeah, and really that's specific to digital consoles, right? So, obviously in an analog console we don't have that necessarily that saturation and tape compression component to it. So.
And you came to this signal flow that you like to use on most channels because you came from working in the studio, right? And you were trying to kind of get those same sounds.
Yeah, I mean, that is clearly an analog approach. And I don't necessarily use it on every input by any stretch of the imagination. But on inputs, and especially so when we were working with Petty, where we are trying to get certain elements of that mix to sound very analog, that was the requirement. I mean, I talk about that a little bit in that video, that, it's the one thing you have to remember in digital that we seem to quickly forget. I don't know whether it's just different upbringings or what it is, but if you want a digital console to sound analog, you have to make it sound analog. It has none of the qualities of analog. We have the terrible tendency in this world right now, especially in manufacturing, et cetera, to try to provide you with this silver bullet, right? The silver bullet of, if you use this, you'll have the analog sound.
You'll get everything you want.
And it's just not the case. If you go back and examine analog and why it sounded analog, really all you got to do is look at what was demanded of digital to understand what made analog sound the way it did. Meaning it was a combination of lots of things that create the analog sound, right? It's a preamp characteristic, it's transformers, it's circuit design, it's all kinds of things, something that is harmonically rich. There may be some signal compression that comes from a function of the tape. All kinds of things play into it. It's a sum of the parts, not just one thing, right? Mm-hmm. And we have a tendency in digital to think, well, I'm going to put this one thing on it and it's going to sound analog. No, you've got to treat the signal path as an analog signal path, so... the other piece of it that you didn't mention there, that I don't even know if I mentioned in the thing, is I also have actual hard transformers in my circuit path, because I want to create that sound. It's a funny story. When we got ready to do Petty this last tour, I have a set of Western Electric transformers that I use right across my mix bus, and it was the first time I had ever worked with Vic Wagner as my systems engineer, and we were prepping the tour, and I have these set up like in a lunchbox kind of thing, and it's heavy. I mean, that thing must weigh 60 pounds.
Oh, wow.
And so I got it set up with XLRs and everything, and it's real clean, really nice. And I said, Vic, I'm going to send you my transformers. I want you to put them in the doghouse, go ahead and mount them in there, and then just patch them in the insert point right across the left-right bus. He was like, okay, yeah, no problem, blah, blah, blah. So these things show up, and I get this phone call, it's Vic, and I'm thinking, oh, this must be about the transformers. And he calls up and he goes, you're kidding, right?
Because they're so heavy?
You're kidding, right? He goes, we're going to add 60 pounds to the back of the console just to insert these transformers across the mix bus? I was like, dude, just do it. And please just trust me on this. I'll explain when we get to rehearsals, So we get there, and I start pulling up the mix and everything. I get things pretty settled in, and I said, come here for a second. And I just start taking the master insert bus in and out, just hitting those transformers or not hitting the transformers. And his eyes got about the size of golf balls. He was like, holy cow, you're kidding me right now, right?
So the change is really obvious.
Yeah, I was like, hey, yeah, this is not subtle stuff we're talking about here, buddy. So, it all comes from, this all stems back to a much bigger conversation, really. But it's all about, kind of building a sonic expectation in your mind. Mm-hmm. I've said this many times. The mix is already done. It's in my brain. I've just got to execute it on the piece of technology now, right? The sound that I'm looking for, it already exists. It's in my head. I've just got to find out how to do it on the console now, So, and to me, that's maybe one of the biggest skills as a mixer that you can get, is setting a level of expectation, and instead of just searching for sounds, kind of targeting sounds and going, I got to go get this specific sound here,
Robert, what's wrong with me setting all of my mic preamps in such a way that all of my channel faders will sit at 0? Because I want to be mixing around 0, so why don't I just set that up with my mic preamps?
You can absolutely do that. The problem is you have then no way to offset those levels to create a music balance, because you have no grouping. So, and this is kind of the what's the word I'm looking for? The Achilles heel of people that want to work that way. Because I've worked that way in the past, but the secret of that has always been the subgroups, and people have not realized that in the past. Because if you just put the faders at 0 and then turn up the mic pre to get the level that you want to create the mix, especially so in digital, what you've really damaged is your bit rate of your conversion, the bit depth of your conversion, right? And you're now mixing families of music essentially on the preamps.
Yep.
Right? If I want to turn down the drums, what are you going to do? You're going to turn down your faders? Well, you should, honestly. The idea is to start at least my idea. This is what I present to people. The idea is to set that preamp level where it is optimized for bit depth and dynamic range, right? Meaning I want to set that signal to get its RMS level as close to a maximum bit depth without possibility of overdriving or creating overs in that input, especially for digital, right? And typically, if I can convert those signals RMS at about 20, 21 bit, that's right around line level. The important piece of that is to understand where the line level is on that signal. And once you do that, everything flows from there. Everything flows so easy from there. And I try to get people to say, you really, in terms of faders, I want to keep those at, +6, -10, somewhere in that range, because that's the highest resolution of the fader throw, right? I get the most detail work in that. Then the challenge becomes, if I've got all these drum inputs gained up to here and the faders up in that area, how do I turn it up or down, right? How do I set the level for the music that I'm going to mix today, right? And you could do that with a VCA. I suggest people do it with an audio subgroup and use VCAs for much other specialized things, because you don't want, with VCAs, obviously you're affecting post fader buses off of those inputs, right?
Sure, you're saying.
If I have to turn down a VCA -20 to get the drums to sit at the right level in the PA system, now I've subtracted 20 dB of gain potential from any post fader aux. Now I'm in the same position as I was before. I'm just a one bus removed from it, right? So, it's something I've been taught. Luckily, I was taught from a very, very early age in terms of gain structure, setting up consoles, because I set up analog consoles exactly the same way. And it's just translated great into digital. I had somebody ask me not long ago, hey, how has your mixing changed with digital from analog? I was like, it hasn't changed one bit. It's just a different piece of technology.
Yeah. You still have to make the technologies interface with each other, and that means proper voltage.
Yeah. It hasn't impacted my mixing one iota, other than I can put more detail into it. I can put more variance in it, more controlled variance in it, song to song, if I want to do it. Those kind of things are great about analog for sure. But in terms of just setting gain structure and blah, 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 I do it exactly the same way I did it in analog. Exactly the same.
Robert, what outputs do you send from the console to the PA?
I break up the PA into, especially in line source, a main. And, if we've got split arrays, then I will do aux sends to it, all driven from matrix. So there's an independent matrix for every quote-unquote system in the PA system. You follow me there?
Yeah, so you take your left-right bus. I'm guessing that you're mixing to stereo, basically, and then you're sending that with the matrix to the various outputs.
That's correct. And it is a little more specialized than that. And I've been doing this for a long time. I was even doing this in analog for a long time too, where I take that matrix and I actually separate the left-right bus from the vocal groups, right? So my actual left-right bus is only music.
Interesting, okay.
And then my vocal subgroups, meaning lead vocal, backing vocal, whatever, go to the matrix directly. They do not go through that music left-right. And I would probably never do this in the studio. I don't think I would anyway. Maybe. I don't know. But I certainly do it in live sound because it gives me the ability to tonally and dynamically address that music mix without the possibility of ever impacting gain before feedback on the vocal.
Okay.
So it works just fantastic. The only challenge you have with it in digital really is you got to pay very close attention to latency there, because you're going to have a latent path.
Right.
Especially if you do a lot of inserts on the left-right. On the left-right, you actually have a music mix that is going to be latent to the vocals, so you'll end up having to delay those vocal groups to put them back in time with the left-right. But that's simple to do in today's digital world.
Okay, that's interesting.
But you got to pay attention to it, for sure.
Right. So, and you're not doing this so that you can send the vocals to different places, like to different speakers or arrays or whatever. You're just doing it so that you can have another option of doing more processing on just the band mix, the music mix.
That's correct, yeah. And then it actually becomes a mixing feature too, because if you look at the layout on my console, I have the master left-right sitting right next to my lead vocal on the console. Mm-hmm. And I'm doing, I may be doing anywhere from half dB to 2 dB rides on the master left-right against the vocal. Mm-hmm. And then, maybe if it's a big exciting part, you can literally just turn up the band and then turn them right back down. I've said this before, it becomes intoxicating to mix that way. It just becomes so much fun. And so, you get so zoned in, and just these little changes make big differences in, places that you reveal the vocal and all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's just, once you get used to it, you'll just never go back.
Tell us about your work bag. What are some fun or interesting pieces that you bring with you, or I don't know, pieces that you think are important that you would never want to be without?
Job number one there is my headphones. They asked me, Live Sound Magazine asked me the other day for my desert island piece of gear. I said my headphones. Okay. It's honestly the only thing I think I could go to a gig without and not survive the gig. Probably. I rely on them so heavily. Mm-hmm. So headphones.
What kind do you have?
I've got a little. I use the Shure's, the 840s. I've been using those for a long time now. So I have a little impulse clicker. I mean, it's basically a polarity checker that I take that I use to do some acoustical analysis of the impulse response of the PA. Short of Smart and any FFT I'm using to do that, it's just a really, really quick down and dirty way to check the impulse of the PA in the room. I mean, it's just literally this thing that happens, right? And if you have reflections, you have any kind of thing, you have out of time areas of your PA system, it just reveals it immediately, and then you can kind of go in and start looking for it with your FFT,
And I know people are going to ask me this later, so what is the model of that?
Oh, I don't remember.
I didn't think you would.
And it's in my travel kit, which is just coming back from the Latin Grammys.
That's okay. If you remember later, email me and I'll put it on the page.
I'll email it to you. Yeah.
So I know you use Smart, but I also am sure that on every show that you work on, there is also a dedicated systems technician. So what is that relationship like? Because I'm sure they are also using their own audio analyzer to set up the PA. So do they sort of set it up and do their own tests using Smart, and then you come in and you also use it and you guys work together? What's that relationship like?
No, we work hand in hand in that operation. And, this is something I've kind of stood by and actually taught for a long time. I used to have a seminar program called The Complete Front of House Engineer, and it was centered around that idea of, if you're going to be the mixer, you also should be the system tuner.
Okay.
Because those two things are so interrelated. As a mixer, you've kind of got to know, where the problem comes from. Is it an input problem? Is it an output stage problem? You've got to be able to discern that. And if you just partition off system engineering and make it this mysterious thing that happens over there, it kind of becomes the ghost in the machine. It kind of becomes the thing you can blame for anything, right? And if you're a front of house engineer that is, and it's not that you need to handle all of it, but you need to be involved in the tuning of that PA system to understand what's happening. And I can give you a great example of it when we were working with Petty. With Vic on the last Petty tour, he was probably the first guy that I've let, I don't want to say have total control over it, but he and I were so in sync in terms of what we were going to do on the tour with the PA system that I knew he was thinking like I was thinking, wow. And we kind of proved that over the course of the few weeks of the tour, where his mindset and his approach was very, very similar to mine. So, it became a really, really easy thing. Now, that said, the great example I'll give you here is, I think Vic, and I'm sure it's just a function of the way he was taught, or, it's maybe some of the music he's worked with in the past, he would have a tendency to over-address the low-mid content in the PA system with regard to me. And, if I was the mixer and I didn't know that he was doing that, if I didn't understand that was what was going on, I could blame all sorts of things for it, because it impacted two things. It really impacted the tonality of the vocal, the snare drum, and the bass guitar. every day that I would turn on the tracks in virtual sound check, it would be immediately apparent to me. And I would go, no, you need to release that filter right there, Whereas, it would be very tempting if you didn't know that was going on over there to kind of go, oh, maybe it's the snare drum today, or maybe it's the snare mic, or maybe it's this, or wow, this room doesn't sound very warm. You could just blame all sorts of things where because I was involved in the tuning and because I understood his approach, I could look at the filter set and go, no, you got to give me that 200 back. That's taking all the joy off my snare drum,
I'm trying to sort of imagine what your conversations would be like, because most of the time I'm working by myself, and I think a lot of the people listening are also kind of working by themselves. They're setting up the PA and they're mixing. If you're working with someone else, there's a whole other step where now your thoughts have to come out of your head into words, and you need to be able to say, you need to be able to talk about why you're doing what you're doing, and it's not just, I'm just doing this because. You have to be able to say. So I'm imagining, like, if I'm the system tech and I'm working with you, and I'm saying, all right, Robert, so here's the list of the measurements that I'm going to take, and here's what I'm looking for in each one. Were there those kind of conversations, or did he just sort of went through it and then you would listen to the results?
I'll give you a great example of this where, there's a couple of different philosophies here. And it's not that one is necessarily right or wrong, but one is applicable or not applicable to a given situation. And that is how... I've learned over time through dealing with other systems engineers how differently I do this compared to a lot of people, and that is addressing front fill. All of the bands that I've worked with have had live backstage or live stages, meaning actual amplifiers, actual drums, all of the things, right? So my take has always been on it that the corrupting source in terms of time and phase for the front fill is not the PA system, it's the back line. Right? That is what makes the front fill sound so horrible down there. And, as we all know, when we have a comb filter that's being developed by two sources arriving at different times, there's two ways to address it. Turn one down or time align it. Mm-hmm. That's the only choice if you want to get the phase back in play. Well, the normal response there would be the front fill needs to be louder than the back line. Right? That's how we're going to get the phase right down there. And I've never bought into that. I'm like, no, especially now that we have digital consoles, we have the ability to put all of that back line in time with that front fill and make that front fill a supportive, we're back to sound reinforcement now in that zone. I mean, it's the most important zone you can pick in the building to do. All of the really meaningful ears are going to be sitting in those first 10 rows.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So
those are the people that are going to go back and talk to the band after the show, fellas,
So just so I'm clear on this, so you're saying that in the front there, let's just to be really clear, let's say the very first row, the interaction you should be most concerned with is not the front fill and the main, because you're actually getting a lot more acoustic level from the stage than you are in those seats than the main. So the main two relationships you should be worried about are the level and time interaction between the front fill and the back line.
That's my take on it, for sure. Especially in today's world, because we have such good pattern control from the PA system down there, right? I mean, you can make that kind of its own little standalone, PA system down there. I mean, obviously you're going to have a zone of interaction at some point where the main PA meets the front fill. No doubt about it. But I'm willing to concede that to make the 8 rows in front of it considerably better, considerably better. So, and the reason I bring this up is because, and I've run into this countless times where I walk in on a show that I'm going to mix and, there's no sense of that. Everybody just takes the front fill and aligns it to the PA and we're off to the races. And it's like, well, we still have this colliding amplitude down there now with the PA and the front fill down there. And it's not good. It doesn't sound good.
Now, I can understand one piece of resistance to that would be, well, how do we do that before the band is here? Because you got to wait till sound check then to be able to set level and time for your front fills. Is that right?
No, I'll just put an acoustic source down there like a speaker, take a little control room monitor, a wedge, whatever, and make a good guess at it.
Okay.
I mean, you can get really close. Like a lot of times, it's harder if there's ears, but if there's actual wedges, just send pink noise through the drum fill, FFT it to the front fill.
Wow.
It's a great place to start. And then if you want, you can start to get really Really cool with it. And honestly, it speaks to kind of doing subgroup work, actual audio subgroup on your work, because then you can create a matrix of subgroups that are doing the front fill and time align each instrument basically to that front fill, and now create something that sounds, you could stand down there and it just sounds like a back line with vocal in it,
Are you doing that?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I was sort of thinking about that, and I was like, no, that's too complicated.
No, it's not. It's actually very simple now, because of the amount of buses that we have on the digital consoles. The idea of duplicating a set of subgroups and creating a front fill set of subgroups is easy now. Easy.
I see. So if say for example you have some guitar amps that are significantly farther downstage than your drum fill or your drums or whatever the group they're in, then you could just delay those in their send to the front fill back to the drums. Is that what we're talking about?
That's correct. Yeah, because the place where guys get confused with it is they look at the guitar amp on stage and say, "Well, it's already late. Why would you be delaying it?" And it's like, well, what I'm actually delaying is the microphone on the amp that is hitting you at time 0 out of the PA system, right? Or out of the front fill system, I should say, right?
Yeah.
So it's actually early. The microphone version of that amplifier is arriving early, so you do have the ability to delay it back if you want to do it, and you should. And the best part of all of that is it really reinforces localization in that front fill, meaning if I'm standing, center, and I've got guitars panned, etc. If it matches their placements on stage, man, that becomes really cool down there. Nice. Really cool.
Nice.
And of course, we were doing the LCR thing with the PA. Well, I did LCR ground fill as well. It just translated right down to the front of the stage. And really, the proof is in the pudding, man. I was always doing those sound check events, and one of the things we would always showcase was what we were doing with those front fill, and everybody would just go, "Man, that front fill sounds unbelievable." It's like, yeah, it can do it if you can take some time. We have to be better than just, well, let's throw a cabinet up on the subs and turn it on. That'll be front fill. We can do better than that. I'm pretty sure,
I could do a test where I place a microphone or even just stand and listen at that front fill position and just listen, just measure the mains. How loud is that? Just measure the front fill solo. How loud is that? Or I guess they're not level set yet. So it'd be interesting to just measure the mains versus just measure the acoustic energy coming off the stage without the mains and see which one of those is louder. And for this kind of situation that you're suggesting, it might be really clear that, hey, that level coming off the stage is significantly, let's say 20 dB louder than what you're actually hearing from the mains. Yes, obviously we should be managing the interaction between the front fill and the stage more than the front fill and the main. Okay.
If the PA is loud enough to work with the back line down there, to be over the back line, that tells me that the PA is covering right to the front row. But here's the problem. It's still going to, that offset is still going to exist, right? The PA is probably not going to be in time with the back line when it arrives down there. There's still going to be some offset there. And honestly, it's part of part of my design when I do the PA. I always design for a front fill and push the PA coverage out about 10 rows. They don't want to hear it coming from above their head anyway. You want to be able to pull their attention down to what they're looking at, and the front fill is really, really effective for that.
Robert, what is one book that has been immensely helpful to you?
Ooh, I'm assuming you mean an audiobook.
No, it could be anything. I was talking to Jamie Anderson. He said Siddhartha. I was talking to Michelle Pettinato yesterday, and she said a fiction book she read in high school. So,
oh my gosh! Okay, let me think about that. Well, I'll give you. I'll give you two books. One I'm almost done with. One I'm just starting, and I know this one I'm starting is just going to bend my mind. But they've both had a significant impact on me in the last couple of months. One is called The Revenge of Analog. And it's not what you think about, although it is what you think about. I think it's about. It's actually they cover a bunch of different things in this book, not just audio. They do cover audio and the resurgence of vinyl, but they also talk about the resurgence of the handwritten word, the published magazine, the film, actual film, and these guys that are kind of taking these things on and what impact they're actually having on society. And it's a fascinating read. And it actually validates a lot of things that I've thought, even about analog versus digital. My take on it for a long time, especially in the recording studio, was that what people were yearning for in analog versus digital in the studio was not just the sound quality. Matter of fact, it wasn't primarily the sound quality. It was the workflow that they were missing. Mm-hmm. There's a pace to analog that is really, really attuned to creativity and creative work by an artist, where digital kind of speeds past all that. It's where the speed actually works to your disadvantage a little bit in terms of the creativity. So, that's just one example of it. There are tons of other examples in the book, talking about actual board games versus, phone games or online games, or even gaming, in a setting where you're by yourself versus sitting in a community of players and playing, all of that kind of stuff in that book. It's really got me thinking about a lot of things, even with regard to audio. So that has definitely shaped my thinking lately.
Okay.
And then there's another book that I'm reading called The Perfectionist, which is a really cool read. Really easy read. It's a thick book, but it's an easy read. And it's about these significant points in history where precision played a role in the development of a technology, and how we simply would not have been able to move forward without an element of precision in these people's work. And the first one that they talk about, which is really cool, is talking about the steam engine, where you had to have a cylinder and a piston element that was precise enough not to leak steam. Like they needed to be able to machine it well enough where it would seal and not release steam.
Okay.
And there was only one guy in the world that was able to work in that kind of precision.
Oh, wow.
He had developed a method for doing it. And I think it had to do with gun rifling or something like that. But he was the guy that, they stumbled upon this guy. Otherwise, the steam engine doesn't move forward for probably decades, And I haven't made it all the way through the book yet, but there's just tons of examples of this in that book, and the idea of talking about even being able to discern accuracy versus precision. It's just a really, if you're kind of a geeky-minded person, it's a great, great read. So
cool. Where is the best place for people to follow your work?
Right now, Facebook. I'm definitely in the planning stages for my own website. It's been a little bit of a monster to do it, but I'm going to try to make it a portal to all the things I've done. So I'll bait the hook a little bit with it. So at robertscovill.com, you'll be able to get to Eldon's Boy Productions, which is all my production work. You'll be able to get to Music Canvas Recorders, which is all the studio work here. There's going to be, I've actually had somebody request that I put all the album blogs up there, so I'll probably just start a live album blog and keep that going on there. Every article I've ever written or contributed to, etc., will be housed there. All of the podcasts I've played or been a part of, radio broadcasts, etc., will all be portaled there as well. So, like I said, it's a little bit of an animal to put together, but I think it'll be really good once it's done. It'll be a good resource for some information for some people, for sure.
Yeah, I hope you have a section with all of your, obviously a lot of it's educational stuff, but it'd be great to have sort of a combined archive of all of your educational materials, whether they be videos or articles.
Yeah, there'll be direct links to all the YouTube stuff I've done as well, for sure. So yeah. So I'm just trying to get all that kind of in one place. And honestly, my reason for doing it is a little bit selfish because it's just so unwieldy to do it right now. I need to get it all in one place where you can get to it quickly, where even I can get to it quickly. So
right. Well, Robert Scovill, thank you so much for joining me on Sound Design Live.
Hey, always a pleasure, Nathan. I always enjoy chatting with you, man. You have a great insight on a lot of this stuff. I enjoy the things you put together. It was great to contribute to the book. That was a lot of fun. So I'm hoping you're having good success with that.
Sound Design.
I want to thank Francois Leclerc for the music in today's episode. Look for a link to more of his music in the podcast show notes. Sound Design Live is supported by Bob, Chris, Dave, PC Sound Up, Eliz, Shinkuye, Joel, Michael, and Rodai Free Radio. You can start supporting Sound Design Live today for as little as $1 over at patreon.com/sounddesignlive.